We've been talking about Senator Ron Wyden stopped by Eugene for a town hall meeting yesterday. Wyden discussed a number of local issues. Now, he's been holding the town hall every year since his election in 1996. And joining us live in studio to answer your questions, more questions, Senator Ron Wyden. Thank you so much for being here. I want to go over the 641 town halls in 16 years. You're going to have 642 today in Corvallis. Why is it important to you to meet with the people you represent?
You can't do this job well just sitting behind your desk in Washington, D.C. You have got to get out into Oregon communities and really throw open the doors of government. And it's particularly important right now because with the Citizens United Supreme Court case, so many people think that politics is just about money, money, money.
Right.
And I want to make sure it's about citizen input.
I'm wondering, you've been doing this for 16 years. What is the mood that you're getting from these town halls? Has it changed over the years? 16 years ago, we were in a better financial situation, jobs, the economy. Has the mood changed? Are you seeing more people coming out because they're concerned?
They are. I mean, practically any issue where the second word is bill. It could be medical bill, gas bill, mortgage bill. It really is overwhelmingly about the economy. And I can tell you that people really want to see the Congress knock off this Thelma and Louise routine that we saw a week ago. I mean, this kind of approach just sends real jitters out to consumers and to business and, in effect, the world. So now with the big spending decisions coming up in March, people want a more thoughtful and a more bipartisan approach.
So let's get to the fiscal cliff. You voted for the bill, but I understand it was with some hesitation. Why? And if you could have it your way, which way would it be? What do you represent? What do you want?
The legislation was necessary because had you not passed it, you would have seen millions and millions of middle-class folks face a very stiff federal income tax hike, and that would have again been a real body blow for the economy. I think we've got to get at this spending issue. Right now, we continue to go out and borrow money from countries in Asia to spend on stuff that really isn't a priority. And you have to get at the big issues. We're spending about $600 billion on the military. It's almost twice as much as the rest of the world combined. There are an awful lot of inefficiencies from these big aircraft carriers that we ought to stop spending on. And then Medicare, where you have 10,000 people turning 65 every day for the next 20 years, we've got to find a way to protect that Medicare guarantee and also hold down the costs.
Okay, but here's the problem. March 1st, we're at the same fiscal cliff. What happens then? What do you foresee?
First of all, it's a more serious, fiscal cliff because you cannot duck these big issues. There's a lot of talk in Washington about kicking the can down the road. Well, what happens is if you just keep doing it, the American people end up with a really kicked old can. And that's why I mentioned the big ticket items. Medicare, for example, as you know, has been hugely controversial. And I've kind of got the welts on my back to show for it because I've said we've got to work in a bipartisan way. And you look, for example, at the fact that Oregon really leads the country in some of the new approaches in Medicare, what's called Medicare Advantage,
where
you integrate the care. Those are the kinds of approaches that can hold down Medicare costs, given those demographics that I just mentioned, and protect the guaranteed benefits that seniors rely on.
Well, we did mention, and we did put this on Facebook, asking viewers to submit questions. And we want to go over some of these questions for you. This one comes from Janelle Wild. She wrote, I'd like to know more about how Senator Wyden's chairmanship on the Natural Resources Committee will enable him to help Douglas and Lane counties with their ownership and thus revenues of ONC lands. What's your question, your answer?
We've got to get rural communities off this fiscal roller coaster. And I wrote the timber payments law. It's brought Oregon about $2.5 billion. And even with that money, we've got these rural communities really hurting. So I'm going to try a fresh approach as chairman of the Energy Committee and see if I can knit together a new coalition of all of the communities where there is federal land and federal waters. And they're all interested in the same thing, trying to strike a balance between jobs and environmental protection. And I think if we pull together, for example, people that we've never had before, for example, folks in energy, both fossil fuels and renewables, which I feel so strongly about, we can get a lot more allies. And the only reason we've been able to get the earlier authorization for this funds through is I was able to find new allies in the Senate.
All right. Turning to our next question. What kind of solution, and this is very, very sensitive for people right now, would Senator Wyden propose to properly address mental health and gun control in the United States? And does he believe that we must have a greater focus on mental health care or gun control?
Sean, as the parent of 3 children under 6, I can't even begin to imagine the horror of what those families in Connecticut were dealing with. And you've got a youngster who's 3.
Still, the images that go through my mind.
A lot of people, listening in are all wrestling, with this issue. People always talk about gun control and gun this, gun that. I think what we need is gun sense. And you look, for example, at these federal databases. We've got all these databases that are supposed to be connected. Well, we don't even have a system today that can identify mentally disturbed, people who really shouldn't have these military-style, assault weapons. So I'm in favor of improving those kinds of background checks and those kinds of systems that let us ensure that disturbed people don't get weapons. And then on the mental health issue, what we've seen is often the mental health programs haven't had the resources to communicate with each other. And some of these cases, like the one with Gabby Giffords, the whole community knew you had a disturbed person, and they didn't get the word out. And I think we also ought to focus on getting more programs that serve the mentally ill in the community, since we don't have the institutional services the way, again, there used to be.
Well, you have a lot of work cut out for you, and it must be difficult when you go to Washington, D.C., and you have two sides that see very, very differently. How do you reach that middle ground? And
probably my biggest priority in terms of my service to Oregon is to show that it is possible to be bipartisan while keeping your principles. It's one thing if everybody just says, oh, let's go be bipartisan, and throws their values out the window. But I think in areas like health care, in terms of tax reform, I have a major education bill with Marco Rubio, the prominent Republican from Florida. We can keep our principles, our progressive Oregon principles, and still solve problems with some common sense and bipartisanship.
So many more questions I'd like to ask you. We're out of time. We're going to have you come back again.
I'd like to do it.
It's been really nice to have you this morning.